Before humans learned how to make fire, they had to learn how to control something that already existed in nature. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire was a mysterious and dangerous part of the world. Lightning could set trees on fire. Volcanic eruptions could create enormous flames. Dry grass could burn after a spark. Wildfires could spread across entire landscapes. To early humans, fire was not a tool. It was a force of nature. And yet, at some point in human history, our ancestors began doing something remarkable. They started taking fire with them. They learned how to protect it, and eventually, they learned how to create it themselves. But when did this happen? And how did humans go from being afraid of fire to using it to transform their entire way of life? The story begins long before written history. More than 1,000,000 years ago, early humans were already living in environments where natural fires occurred. Archaeological sites in Africa and other parts of the world contain evidence suggesting that ancient humans interacted with fire very early in our history. However, finding evidence of fire is not the same as proving that humans knew how to control it. A wildfire could burn naturally without any human involvement. So archaeologists look for something more specific. They look for repeated burned areas, charcoal, heated stones, burned bones, and evidence that fire appeared in places where natural flames were unlikely to occur. These clues help researchers determine whether ancient humans were simply living near natural fires or actually using them. The earliest stages were probably simple. Imagine an early human group moving through a landscape after a wildfire. The ground is black. Trees are still smoking. The air is filled with the smell of ash. Most animals would try to escape, but humans could have noticed something unusual. The fire had changed the environment. Animals that had been hiding could become easier to find. Certain plants became easier to eat, and the warmth of the remaining embers could be useful. At first, humans may simply have taken advantage of naturally occurring fire. They could have collected burning branches from a wildfire and carried them back to a sheltered location. Keeping that flame alive, however, was not easy. A fire needs fuel. It needs oxygen, and it needs enough heat to continue burning. If a group wanted to preserve a fire, someone had to keep adding dry wood. Someone had to protect the embers from rain. Someone had to understand which materials burned quickly and which ones could keep a fire alive for hours. This may have been one of the earliest forms of fire management. The fire was no longer simply something that happened in nature. It became something humans maintained, and that changed everything. Fire provided warmth. For early humans living in colder environments, this could make a major difference. A group could gather around a fire at night, instead of remaining exposed to the cold. Fire also produced light. Before artificial lighting, darkness controlled human activity. Night meant limited visibility. Predators could approach without being seen. Travel became dangerous. Food preparation became difficult. But a fire created a small circle of light in an otherwise dark world. That circle could become a place where people gathered. It also created something else: protection. Many wild animals naturally avoid flames and smoke. A fire could therefore discourage some predators from approaching a human camp. It was not a perfect defense, but it gave humans an advantage. However, the most important effect of fire may have been what it did to food. Cooking transformed the way humans could use the resources around them. Raw meat can be difficult to chew and digest. Some plants are difficult to eat safely when raw. Cooking changes the physical and chemical structure of food. It can soften tough materials, destroy many harmful microorganisms, and make certain nutrients easier to access. This meant that fire could turn difficult food into more usable food. But there is an important mystery. Scientists still debate exactly when controlled fire and habitual cooking became widespread among human populations. There is evidence from different archaeological sites suggesting very ancient use of fire, but the evidence does not always tell us exactly how the fire was produced or how consistently it was used. That distinction matters. A group might occasionally use a natural fire without knowing how to create one. Regularly maintaining fire is a much more advanced behavior, and deliberately producing fire is more advanced still. At some point, humans made that final transition. Instead of waiting for lightning or a wildfire, they discovered ways to produce their own flames. One possible method involved striking certain rocks together. When appropriate stones are struck correctly, they can produce sparks. Another method involves friction. By rubbing dry wood together, humans can generate heat. With the right materials, enough heat can eventually create an ember. The ember can then be transferred to dry grass, bark, or another highly flammable material. The process requires patience and skill. It also requires knowledge. The wood has to be dry. The tinder has to be prepared properly. The technique has to generate enough heat. And once a tiny ember appears, it has to be protected and encouraged rather than accidentally extinguished. For humans who depended on fire, this knowledge could be extremely valuable. It could be taught. A person who knew how to make fire could teach another person. That person could teach someone else. Over generations, the knowledge could become part of a group's survival skills. Fire therefore became more than a physical resource. It became cultural knowledge. But its effects went even further. Fire also helped humans work with new materials. Heat can transform stone. It can harden or alter certain materials. Much later, humans would use controlled heat to produce pottery, lime, glass, and metals. The first controlled flames were nowhere near these later technologies. But the principle was already there. Humans had learned that the environment could be transformed through controlled heat. This was one of the foundations of technology. Fire also changed human social life. A fire naturally creates a gathering point. People sit near it. They share food. They maintain the flames. They watch the surrounding darkness. This may have created more opportunities for communication and cooperation. We cannot know exactly what early humans discussed around their fires. There were no written records. But we do know that humans are highly social animals. A reliable source of warmth and light would have created a natural place for groups to gather. Over thousands of generations, fire became deeply connected to human life. It changed where people could live. It changed what they could eat. It changed how they spent the night. It helped them survive colder environments. And eventually, it became the foundation of entire technologies. But there is another important question. Why did humans become so good at controlling fire when most animals do not? Part of the answer is our ability to learn from one another. Humans are unusually good at copying useful behaviors, improving them, and passing them across generations. A single discovery can therefore become collective knowledge. One person discovers a useful technique. Another person improves it. Someone else teaches it to their children. After hundreds or thousands of generations, a simple idea can become a sophisticated technology. Fire is one of the greatest examples of this process. The first humans did not understand combustion. They did not know about oxygen. They did not understand chemical reactions. They did not know why certain materials burned better than others. But they did not need modern science to use fire. They needed observation. They learned what happened when dry wood was placed near an ember. They learned which plants caught fire quickly. They learned which would burn slowly. They learned how wind affected flames. They learned how to protect a fire from rain. And eventually, they learned how to create fire whenever they needed it. This was an enormous turning point. Before controlled fire, humans were largely adapting themselves to the environment. After controlled fire, humans increasingly began changing their environment to meet their needs. That difference would define much of human history. Thousands of years later, humans would use fire to make pottery. Then they would discover ways to work metals. They would create furnaces. They would make tools. They would produce bricks and glass. Eventually, humans would learn to use combustion to power engines, factories, ships, trains, and airplanes. Modern civilization would become dependent on controlled energy. But the basic idea was incredibly old. Control the flame. Control the heat. Use that energy to transform the world. The first human who successfully created a fire could not have imagined any of this. They were not trying to start an industrial revolution. They were probably trying to stay warm, cook food, protect their group, or survive another night. Yet, that simple achievement became one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. Fire did not make humans powerful overnight. It took countless generations of experimentation. But once humans learned to control it, the relationship between humans and the natural world began to change. A wildfire had once been something humans could only escape. Eventually, humans learned to carry its power. They learned to preserve it. They learned to create it. And finally, they learned to use it to reshape the world. The discovery of fire was not one single moment. There was probably no single person who invented it. Instead, it was a long process that unfolded over an enormous period of time. Generation after generation, humans observed nature, experimented with materials, learned from mistakes, and passed knowledge forward. That is what makes the history of fire so important. The real breakthrough was not simply producing a flame. It was learning that nature could be understood, controlled, and used. And once humans learned that lesson, there was almost no limit to what could come next. The first fire may have started with a lightning strike, but the human ability to control fire helped light the path towards civilization itself.